So Grace, I'm going to start with you. The Me Too movement revealed sort of obvious flaws in existing approaches to investigating workplace harassment, ranging from inadequate procedures to delays in completing the process, to a lack of transparency about the ultimate outcome of investigations. In your role at Morgan Lewis, you use your combined employment and workplace law experience and investigative expertise to help employers investigate and address workplace crises stemming from claims of sexual harassment. I was hoping we could have you start by just sort of talking about why investigations are important in the first place and what a fair investigation looks like, in your opinion, and how have existing processes changed to adapt to the current work environment?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted to be with you. As Rachel mentioned, investigations are a big part of my practice, and investigations are necessary because you do not only to get to the bottom of what issues are being raised, but investigations also help you with finding out your culture. Okay, because during the course of investigating one claim, for example, you will hear undercurrents of things that are going on at the company that is part of the culture and may need to be changed and looked at after you've finished that individual investigation. So I think they are important, not because they're also legally required, but because they also help you get to looking at your culture. And we do a lot of culture assessments, and oftentimes they start with an investigation. In terms of best practices and how things have changed, I think you have to look at sort of the three parts of an investigation. The beginning, when the claim comes forward, the middle, which is the investigation part, and then the end, which is after the investigation is complete, and the closeout, and then what follows after the closeout. In the beginning, I think, first of all, it's very important to demystify the process, all right? A lot of times people don't want to come forward because they don't understand the process. They're worried about the process. I was just interviewing a witness right before this, in which she was very concerned about this getting out of control, and that the fact that she would not have any say in how this was going to proceed. So I think you have to demystify the process, and that's explaining the process. It's asking about accommodations, whether or not we need to do something to make the claimant feel more comfortable as this is going on, whether it means, for example, she wants to work in a different location with a different manager, or maybe even take leave. But you have to have those discussions. And you also have to make sure that the claimant understands that she is going to be supported through this process, what the process looks like, what resources are available, and what the end of the process will be. When you're meeting with witnesses, and I like to focus on the claimant because I think that is very important, you have to go into the questioning process and not conduct it as an interrogation. Many organizations, and I know some clients who actually have security do these investigations. That's not right, okay? Security, the police coming in essentially to do a sexual harassment investigation, that puts everyone at a very, very uncomfortable level. So an investigator who is trained, an investigator who is empathetic, an investigator who explains the process after the investigation, and an investigator who makes sure that if the investigator isn't checking in with the claimant during the process, that someone at the company is checking in to see how that individual is going. It's also important for the person who is accused to understand the process, because oftentimes they don't understand the process. Oftentimes that can cause retaliation. So I think you've got to put everyone who's in the process at ease, treat it with empathy, understanding the process. And then afterwards, you have to make sure that there is an appropriate closeout, all right? And what does that mean? I start with transparency, all right? A lot of people don't report because they say, why should I report? I have had friends who've reported and nothing has happened. And in all likelihood, something has happened, but there hasn't been transparency in the closeout of the investigation. And in addition to the closeout of the investigation, you have to make sure that there's going to be continuing support and resources after you close out the investigation. Someone who is checking on the claimant, someone assuming that the accused party is still there, who's checking on that person. But there has to be ongoing support for some period of time, because these things can be very traumatic, and we need to make sure that there is support. And then finally, and I know we'll talk about this later, so I don't want to jump the gun, I think employees need to understand what potential discipline looks like in terms of various levels of violations. All right. There will be different discipline depending on many things, the seriousness of the allegation, how many people were involved and things of that nature. But I know we'll talk a little bit later about discipline matrix. And I'll stop right here. I know we don't have much time. I could go on forever about this.
That's great, and a perfect transition to what we were going to talk about next. So I'm going to turn to Brittany. Brittany, one thing that our research really demonstrated is that there's a wide range of approaches employers are taking when it comes to defining policies for determining appropriate corrective action after an investigation is concluded. As part of its commitment to publishing a U.S. safety transparency report, Uber partnered with Urban Institute and National Sexual Violence Resource Center to develop a taxonomy to categorize incidents on its ride-sharing platform and determine what steps to take. Can you tell us about the process you all went through to create the taxonomy and how it's been useful in addressing I can't say the word incidents apparently today, but incidents fairly and proportionately in the ride-sharing context?
Yeah, definitely. And I think someone will probably put the entire white paper in the chat so you can dig into the details of the methodology that Urban Institute and NSVRC went through in partnership with Uber. So I won't get too far into the details, although I would love to, because I could talk about it all day. And you have Chad and Janine here, who are two of the co-authors of the taxonomy. So you can certainly feel free to chat them some questions or connect with them offline. But yes, in some ways, first of all, I want to clarify. I'm stepping in for our Chief Legal Officer, Tony West. There are a lot of great things about working for Tony West. One of the bad things is you have to step into his shoes sometimes at the last minute. So I certainly cannot give the Tony West experience, but I will try today. And the other thing I wanted to call out is my role is mainly focused on adjudicating or overseeing the policies that adjudicate incidents on the platform, like Rachel mentioned, not between internal Uber employees. And as many of you know, drivers and delivery people, while they are not Uber's employees, they're independent contractors. So that does limit some of our ability to adjudicate. And of course, riders, we also don't have any kind of jurisdiction over their behavior either. But I'll get into kind of how we go into investigations and how we approach those on what some would consider the pinnacle of a decentralized workplace, really, because Uber is in 60 plus countries. We do 16 million trips per day. And so there are independent contractors working as delivery couriers and drivers all over the world. And they're taking so many trips. And so that we're pretty much the expert now at decentralized workplace. So when we first partnered with NSVRC and Urban, it was originally for data collection and data integrity to make sure that we were getting our incident data in shape. We could not consciously put out a safety transparency report for the public that details the incidents of sexual violence on our rides platform without having confidence and reliability and accuracy in the data classification. And we knew that really, and as all of you know, there are no really standard definitions when it comes to things like sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual violence. These are all very broad terms that can differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and from field to field. So for the first time ever, Uber worked with Urban Institute and NSCRC to develop the first of its kind taxonomy that can classify individual incidents of unwanted sexual behavior. And that ranges, of course, from, pretty low severe incident of staring and leering, for instance, all the way to the most severe, which is non-consensual sexual penetration, or which many criminal codes would classify as rape. And so the taxonomy, I think somebody popped it in the chat. It's in Appendix 2 in that document. And it ended up being 21 categories stratified into 2 overarching parent categories. So you have sexual misconduct, ranging from staring and leering, like I said, all the way to verbal threat of sexual assault. And then you have a parent category of sexual assault, which includes incidents that include attempted or completed physical touching or penetration in some cases. So I won't go too far into the taxonomy since you have that resource there. You can dig in on your own time. So now I'd like to just talk a little bit about how it's really been useful in Uber's context. Quite frankly, I don't know what women's safety would look like without this taxonomy at Uber. We have used it not just for data classification, but we have actually used it to determine proper action on our platform. As you can imagine, a driver looking or staring at a rider should be actioned quite differently than a driver who rapes a rider, right? And so early on once the taxonomy was published in 2018, we then started creating different modules of education mapped to certain categories of the taxonomy. So when we receive a report of unwanted sexual behavior, sometimes it's flirting, or a rider asking a driver for their phone number or for their social media, or commenting on their appearance, something that is absolutely inappropriate in the context of ride sharing, but may not necessarily lead to a deactivation that this person should no longer be able to use Uber, right? And we think we talked about that a lot yesterday. And so while we definitely want to hear about these incidents every single time they happen, because we want to keep tabs on any patterns of behavior that are happening. For the less severe incidents, things like flirting, where people might not have the intention of being intentionally violent or sexually violent to the person. They just may not understand boundaries. We have mapped out the taxonomy with certain educational modules that we worked with RAIN to develop. RAIN is, of course, the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network that also operates the National Sexual Assault Hotline. So when we receive reports of flirting, inappropriate questions, comments about appearance, those kinds of things, we will send the accused party educational modules that they have to view, and then to hopefully correct their behavior. And we will make it clear that a pattern of this behavior can lead to up until deactivation and privilege to use the platform. Now, on the other side of things, when there are more serious allegations, things like actual touching or, God forbid, penetration, we have a very rigorous standard that we use and a investigation process that's also actually detailed in our safety reports. I think someone's going to put that in the chat as well. And it's a very long document, but I think I gave you the page numbers where you can go right to the actual process. But at a high level, when an incident report, which we would categorize as critical sexual assault, which is the 5 more severe categories of sexual assault, come in, the first thing our agents do, well, first of all, I think it's important to clearly say we have a separate team of safety agents that are dedicated to these kinds of investigations that only deal with sexual assault, serious sexual misconduct, fatalities, life-altering injuries, those kinds of things. And they go through extensive trauma-informed training. And on the sexual violence side of things, they went through a training developed by RAIN that covered everything from the neurobiology of trauma to empathetic communication to active listening to implicit bias, right? So they really have kind of gone above and beyond what your normal customer service agent, if you were to write into Uber and say, my driver took a wrong turn or I left my wallet in there. That's not the team that would be handling sexual assault incidents. So the investigation, it starts out with the investigators identifying the accused party, and we immediately temporarily deactivate their account so they can no longer use the platform while the investigation is conducted. And we do that for safety reasons. We take the victim's word as the word. So we do immediately temporarily suspend the account while the investigation is completed. The investigation could last for a couple of days, and why that is because we core tenets of our investigation is to call and get what we call a statement of experience from the accused party, as well as the victim or the reporting party in this case. And so that's where the training, of course, comes in for investigators to be empathetic and trauma informed. But what they also will do is, or what's also part of our training is, we really take the victim's statement of experience as the most, I wouldn't say the most important, but we prioritize it over a lot of other things. And it's critical in making actions. So investigators also will look at things like GPS data, screenshots of text messages, dash cam footage if we have it, anything that was provided to the investigator through the investigation. But what we really rely on as a pinnacle of our adjudication process is really what the victim has told us. And so if we do get a statement of experience by the victim in those most 5 severe categories of sexual assault, the accused party is deactivated permanently. So that's how investigations kind of work at Uber. The safety report goes into much more detail. I'm sorry, I don't have enough time to go into more. But if you have any questions, you can certainly chat me or find me offline.
Yeah, it's obviously a lot to cover, and that's really, really fascinating. I want to check quickly. Grace, so you've sort of created similar rubrics for employers to Uber's taxonomy, but to use in the workplace setting where incidents are occurring between people who are more likely to have a shared history than in the ride-sharing context. Can you talk about, from your perspective, what a good corrective action rubric might look like in the employment context and why you think people should put them together?
Sure, and I sent one. I'm not good at sharing the screen, so maybe at some point we can provide it to individuals to take a look at. But essentially, the taxonomy, when transferred into the workplace, it basically comes up with a matrix, all right, and goes through almost every sort of possible scenario or type scenario that you can imagine in the workplace. It doesn't just include sexual harassment, okay? It includes all types of EEO as well as civility codes, even in some organizations. And so what you have is you come up with a matrix that goes through sort of the least severe in each instance to the most severe, and assuming that the claim is substantiated, whether it's touching someone, whether it's telling a terrible joke, whether it's, retaliation will likely get people fired. So I won't say whether it's retaliation, but even retaliation is on the chart. And you give specific facts, whether someone kissed someone, whether someone called or used a racial epithet, whatever, okay? And it will list all of those things, and depending on the severity, it will also list what the corrective action should be. And then there is a guidance document which gives HR and managers guidance on how to implement that. Now, the good thing about having a matrix, what we call a corrective action matrix in the workplace, is that one, it ensures consistency, all right? Because a touch is a touch is a touch. And if you touch someone inappropriately, this is what's going to happen to you. And it's going to happen across the board because everybody's looking at the same matrix. So if you have different offices, different locations, you're going to have a matrix. Employees understand the impact and what will happen if they do certain things, right? No surprises because it's all set forth in the matrix and it's also shared with the employees. I think one of the more important things about having the matrix is that hopefully people will understand that there is value in reporting, right? Because if the claim is substantiated, they can look at that matrix and see what the outcome should be, and the company having this matrix has to make sure that that is the outcome.